Ashton Heights is a city drowning in corruption, where the police abuse their power and judges are easily bought. When Monica Caldwell, a successful businesswoman, dares to stand against injustice, they quickly plot to destroy her. A fabricated case, a rigged trial, everything designed to put her behind bars. But just as the judge is about to deliver the verdict, a shocking secret is revealed. Night fell over Ashton Heights, bringing with it a darkness heavier than the flickering streetlights could ever push back. This city never truly slept, not because of a thriving nightlife or hardworking citizens burning the midnight oil. No, Ashton Heights was different. It stayed awake to watch, to control, and most of all, to crush anyone who dared to stand against the forces pulling its strings from the shadows. Garrett Boone, a police lieutenant, stood on the balcony of an old building, his gaze sweeping over the streets below. He took a slow drag of his cigarette, the smoke curling into the stifling air of the city. Boone wasn't just any cop. He was part of the system, a system he and men like him had built and upheld for years. Below, a police cruiser drifted down the street. Inside sat Travis O'Connell, Boone's trusted partner. He was grinning, that knowing, sinister grin, as he spotted a group of black teenagers gathered outside a convenience store. Moments later, one of them was yanked into the back of the squad car without cause. He wouldn't be going home tonight. Boone knew it, and he didn't care. This system had existed for too long. People could complain, they could protest, but in the end, nothing ever changed. No one could change it. No one except Monica Caldwell. Monica Caldwell was not the kind of woman who bowed easily. A successful entrepreneur, she had built her chain of organic grocery stores from the ground up. But more importantly, she was a fighter. She wasn't just running a business. She was using her voice to call out injustice, to protect her community from men like Boone and O'Connell. Just last week, she had led a community meeting in the heart of the city. The crowd filled the street, hanging on to every word as Monica spoke out against the corruption running through the police force. She didn't hesitate to name names, didn't flinch as she pointed directly at the truth. They don't protect us. They control us, she had declared. And Boone knew that if she kept going, there would come a day when he could no longer control the narrative. That night, Monica received an anonymous call. A deep, cold voice seeped through the darkness. "Stop this, Monica. You have no idea who you're up against." She was silent for a moment. Then, she let out a quiet, knowing laugh. "Oh, I know exactly who I'm up against. The question is, do you?" A low chuckle drifted through the receiver. No more warnings. Just the dull, empty beep as the call ended. But Monica understood. This wasn't advice. It was a threat. And if Boone and men like him thought a threat could make her stop, then they had never truly understood Monica Caldwell. She wasn't afraid of the dark. She had been raised in it, and now she would be the fire that burned it down. Garrett Boone tapped the ash from his cigarette against the edge of the crystal ashtray, watching as it fell onto the glass table in the lavish office at the top floor of Crown Royale. The VIP room, soundproof, impeccably furnished, was lined with gleaming oak-paneled walls and bathed in the warm glow of amber lighting. A bottle of aged whiskey sat at the center of the table, its golden liquid swirling gently inside crystal glasses. Across from Boone sat Travis O'Connell and Richard Alden, the city's most powerful judge. None of them smiled, but all three understood exactly why they were here. Boone spoke first. "Monica Caldwell has to disappear." O'Connell chuckled, leaning back in his chair, twirling his whiskey glass between his fingers. "Easier said than done. We can't handle this the old-fashioned way. That woman isn't the kind who just disappears without anyone noticing." Judge Alden narrowed his eyes, his voice calm but cold. "What are you suggesting?" O'Connell leaned forward, setting his glass down. "I'm saying, if we're too obvious, the media will swarm like vultures. And she doesn't just have a few supporters. She has an entire community behind her. We need a different approach. A legal one." Boone nodded, his gaze sharp. "We're not going to kill her. We're going to destroy her." Alden smirked, a slow, knowing smile. "I'm starting to like the way you think, Boone. So what's the plan?" Boone reached into his jacket, pulled out a cigar, lit it, and exhaled a slow plume of smoke. Then he spoke deliberately. We're going to turn Monica into a criminal. The plan was meticulous. Step 1. Manufacture the evidence. Carlos Rivas, a small-time drug dealer, was already in custody for possession. He had two choices: serve 15 years in prison or cooperate. It wasn't hard to guess which one he'd pick. Boone would make sure Rivas testified that Monica was his supplier. A blatant lie, but if a junkie said it, it would be enough to get a search warrant. Step 2. Set the trap. They would target one of her organic grocery stores, the flagship location, the one most visible to the public. A SWAT team would raid the store and discover a sizable stash of narcotics hidden in the storage room. No witnesses would dare come forward. Anyone who tried would be dealt with, one way or another. Step 3. Destroy Monica's reputation. The moment Monica was arrested, the press would be notified. Headlines would brand her a fraud, a double-faced entrepreneur who used her activism as a cover for drug trafficking. Public opinion would turn against her in an instant. And once she lost the people's trust, Monica Caldwell would no longer be a threat. When Boone finished laying out the plan, silence hung in the air. Then, Alden took a slow sip of whiskey and nodded approvingly. Sounds perfect. Boone smirked. He knew that once the public believed his story, the truth no longer mattered. Judge Alden placed his glass down, laced his fingers together, and studied Boone carefully. I can make sure she doesn't get bail. But if you want the maximum sentence, I'll need something worthwhile. Boone didn't speak. He simply reached into his jacket and tossed a thick envelope onto the table. Alden glanced at it, then slowly opened it. Stacks of crisp bills lay inside, enough to buy injustice without question. Alden let out a quiet laugh and closed the envelope. I suppose justice has its price. Boone stood, adjusted his collar, and flicked the nearly burned-out cigar into the ashtray. Not justice, Judge. Victory. The storm is coming. Outside the restaurant, the night was deep and heavy. Boone and O'Connell stepped onto the sidewalk, the dim streetlights casting long shadows as they turned their gaze toward the heart of the city, where Monica's stores still glowed against the dark. She won't have another chance, Boone murmured. O'Connell chuckled, clapping a hand on his shoulder. By tomorrow, Ashton Heights will have a new, dangerous criminal, and she'll never rise again. They stepped into the car, the engine roared to life, and they disappeared into the night. None of them knew that in just a few weeks, this perfect plan would become their own grave. Morning in Ashton Heights began with a false sense of stillness. The sun had yet to rise, and the streets were still cloaked in darkness. A thin layer of fog hovered over the rooftops, dulling the glow of the dim streetlights. At this hour, the only movement usually came from newspaper couriers and a handful of night shift workers heading home. But today, a tactical police unit was stationed in a secluded corner, poised for a raid they believed would shake the entire city. Lieutenant Garrett Boone lowered his car window, drumming his fingers idly against the steering wheel. His gaze was fixed on Caldwell's market, eyes sharp, predatory, like a hunter watching its prey. Beside him, Travis O'Connell stretched lazily, rolling his shoulders. Do we really have to do this at the crack of dawn? It's not like she's going anywhere. Boone didn't answer right away. He lit a cigarette, took a deep drag, exhaled slowly, then spoke in a measured tone. We're not just arresting her. We're destroying her. And if we do this right, she'll never get back up again. O'Connell smirked. Then let's get started. Boone picked up his radio. His voice was cold, unfeeling. All units in position. We move now. 5 a.m. Tires screeched against asphalt. 4 unmarked police vehicles surged forward, engines growling. Headlights off, predators closing in. Doors slammed open. Officers in bulletproof vests poured out, weapons drawn. Police raid. The front glass doors of Caldwell's market shattered under the force of a battering ram. Like a violent storm, the officers flooded inside, barking orders. Get down. Hands where we can see them. Inside, a few overnight workers flinched in terror, throwing their hands up. Rachel King, Monica's trusted assistant, stumbled backward, her voice shaking. What the hell is this? This is a legal business. She barely had time to react before an officer shoved her to the ground. Behind the register, a figure emerged. Monica Caldwell, She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She simply stood there, arms crossed, eyes razor-sharp as she took in the chaos unfolding before her. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Her voice was calm, unshaken. Boone stepped forward, wearing a polite, almost amused smile. But his eyes gleamed with something far more sinister. "We received a tip about illegal drug activity on these premises. Just a routine inspection." Monica didn't flinch. "A routine inspection with 30 armed officers?" Boone smirked. "Then you won't mind if we take a look around." He signaled to O'Connell. "Tear it apart." The command was given. Officers fanned out, yanking open drawers, knocking over shelves, tearing through inventory in the back room. Monica remained still. She knew what was coming. And then it happened. O'Connell disappeared into the stockroom for a few minutes. When he reappeared, he was holding a clear plastic bag filled with neatly wrapped packets of white powder. "Got it," he shouted. The store fell in a stunned silence. Monica didn't blink. Rachel inhaled sharply, face going pale. Boone took the bag, holding it up for Monica to see. "Care to explain?" Monica's voice was like steel. "I have no idea where that came from." Boone clicked his tongue, shaking his head like a man burdened by disappointment. "That's unfortunate, because I do." He motioned to an officer behind him. The sharp click of handcuffs echoed through the store. For the first time in her life, Monica Caldwell was arrested, inside the very business she had built from nothing. Boone leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "You picked the wrong fight, Caldwell." Monica didn't respond. She just looked him dead in the eye, without fear, without submission, because she knew one thing for certain. The real fight had only just begun. 7 a.m. breaking news. Across every television screen in Ashton Heights, a special news report interrupted the morning broadcast. "We've just received shocking news. Prominent activist and businesswoman Monica Caldwell was arrested early this morning on drug-related charges." The footage played on repeat. Monica Caldwell, handcuffed in front of her own store. Her face showed no fear, no remorse, but that didn't matter. All the public saw was a black woman being led away by police, a bag of drugs held up as evidence. And just like that, the world erupted. On social media, the outrage spread like wildfire. Hundreds of posts flooded news feeds and comment sections. I always knew there was something off about her. No one's that righteous without hiding something. So much for her justice. Turns out she was just another drug dealer. I used to support her. Now I feel sick. The headlines came fast and ruthless, splashed across every news site. The two faces of Monica Caldwell, justice icon or criminal mastermind. The system had done its job well. Monica had spent a lifetime fighting for the truth. And in just a few hours, a lie had erased it all. Monica was led into the station, her hands still cuffed behind her back. She didn't speak. She didn't struggle. She knew that if she lashed out, if she showed even a flicker of anger, they would use it against her. Boone wanted to see her break, but she wouldn't give him that satisfaction. As she walked down the hallway, a few officers leaned against their desks, arms crossed, smirking. Well, didn't see this coming, Caldwell. Thought you were some kind of saint. Turns out you're just another dealer," one of them sneered. Monica met his gaze. She said nothing, but the way she looked at him, the quiet, unwavering steel in her eyes, was enough to shut him up. The interrogation room. Boone sat across from her, a file placed neatly on the table between them. "You know how this ends, don't you?" he said, voice casual, almost friendly. But the triumph in his eyes gave him away. Monica leaned back in her chair, arms folded. "I think I'll be walking free the moment a real attorney looks at your so-called evidence." Boone chuckled under his breath. He slid the file toward her. "You can try, but I'd suggest you cooperate. You have the right to remain silent." But he leaned in slightly. "You know how this system works. The moment the press labels you a criminal, it won't matter if you beat the charges. You'll never be Monica Caldwell again." Monica didn't blink. "You really think I'll kneel for you?" Boone exhaled sharply, smirking as he leaned back in his chair. "I don't need you to kneel. I just need you gone." He stood, walked to the door, and left her alone in the cold, empty room. The city turns its back. Outside, the city was divided. Those who had once stood beside Monica now found themselves at a crossroads. Some believed she was innocent, but feared speaking up. Some weren't so sure anymore. The calls and messages from friends, colleagues, people who had once called her a hero, began to dwindle. She didn't need to check her phone to know what was happening. They were distancing themselves. They were afraid. A lawyer's resolve. At his office, attorney Elliot Chambers stared at his ringing phone, jaw tight. He answered, his voice clipped. "I saw the news. I'm on my way." He hung up, gripping the phone in his fist. Elliot had once worked inside the system. He had been a prosecutor, fighting for the law, until he saw firsthand how the law could be twisted to serve the powerful and silence the innocent. He had walked away from that life. And now, he refused to let Monica Caldwell become its next casualty. The storm is coming. Night fell over Ashen Heights. Monica sat alone in her cell, the cold walls closing in around her. She had seen this play out before. They always found a way to bend justice, to turn victims into villains, to shield the truly guilty. But she was no victim. She was Monica Caldwell. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and prayed. Not for salvation, for the strength to fight. They thought they had destroyed her, but they had no idea. The real storm had only just begun. Darkness consumed the tiny jail cell. A dull neon light flickered above, casting faint shadows over the cold concrete floor. The air was thick with dampness, the scent of decay clinging to the walls. Monica Caldwell sat on the narrow metal cot, her back pressed against the gray cinder block wall. No windows, no sound, only silence and the slow, creeping weight of isolation. How long had she been here? 1 night? 2? She wasn't sure anymore. She knew their game. Leave her in this cage. Let the isolation gnaw at her mind, break her down piece by piece. They wanted her to crumble, but Boone didn't understand her. She wouldn't break that easily. Her body might be imprisoned, but her spirit was still free. Then, footsteps, a door unlocking. A shadow appeared in the doorway. Elliot Chambers, her lawyer. Tall, lean, dressed in a dark suit, his sharp eyes filled with quiet determination. Monica lifted her head, arms still crossed. "I assume you're not here to offer condolences?" Elliot pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "I'm here to get you out." Monica smirked, but there was no humor in it. "I hope you have a magic trick up your sleeve, because the cops sure as hell aren't letting me walk out of here." Elliot placed his briefcase on the table, flipping it open to reveal stacks of files, documents, reports, legal motions. His voice was steady, resolute. "They set you up. Everything I've reviewed points to it. Their warrant was based on the testimony of a known drug dealer, a guy with a rap sheet longer than a roll of toilet paper. No recorded anonymous tip. No surveillance footage showing you near that stash." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "This case is full of holes, and I intend to use every single one to rip it apart." Monica was silent for a long moment. Then, she asked quietly, "Do you believe I'm innocent, Elliot?" He didn't hesitate. "I know you are, but believe me, truth isn't always enough to win." Monica exhaled slowly. She had known that for a long time. Justice didn't come to those who waited for it. It came to those who fought for it. Elsewhere in the city, Garrett Boone and Travis O'Connell sat in their office, sipping their morning coffee. Boone smirked as he scrolled through the latest headlines on his phone. "She's completely destroyed in the media. It's only a matter of time before she's convicted." O'Connell took a slow sip, nodding. "Should we send a little warning to that lawyer?" "Chambers, I don't like the way he looks at us." Boone shook his head. "No need. Let him dig all he wants. At the end of the day, who controls this system? We do." They clinked their coffee cups together, convinced the fight was already over. What they didn't know was that this was only the beginning. A storm was coming, one they would never be able to stop. The fire still burns. When Elliot left, Monica remained seated, deep in thought. She thought of everything she had fought for, everything she had built. They could take her freedom. They could smear her name. They could turn the world against her. But they could never make her bow. Monica closed her eyes, fingers tightening around the small cross around her neck. "Lord, I do not ask you to take this burden away. I only asked for the strength to carry it to the end. When she opened her eyes, they were sharp as steel. They thought they had destroyed her, but they had made a fatal mistake. She wouldn't just fight back. She would expose them all, and when the storm finally hit, she would be the last one standing. The heavy steel doors swung open. The sharp clatter of chains echoed against the cold marble floor. Monica Caldwell stepped into the courtroom. She wore a plain orange prison jumpsuit. Her wrists were bound in cuffs, but her head remained high. She refused to let them see fear because she wasn't afraid. The gallery was already packed with spectators and press. Some looked at her with disappointment, some with contempt, but there were others, silent, uncertain, who still believed in her, even if they were too afraid to say it. At the back of the courtroom, Boone and O'Connell sat with smug expressions. Boone leaned over, whispering to his partner, "Look at her. A week ago, she was the city's golden girl. Now, just another petty prisoner." O'Connell smirked. "Just wait. Once Alden hands down the sentence, she'll know what real hell looks like." At the judge's bench, Richard Alden struck his gavel, calling the court to order. His face was expressionless, cold, as if this were just another routine case. But Monica knew better. She knew Alden wasn't neutral. She knew he had been bought by Boone and O'Connell to make sure she never walked free again. The prosecutor stood, his voice loud and unwavering. "Your Honor, the defendant, Monica Caldwell, is charged with possession and distribution of illegal narcotics. The evidence against her is overwhelming. Witness testimony, the results of the raid, and police reports." He turned toward Monica, eyes sharp. The defendant used her status as a respected businesswoman and activist to conceal criminal activity. She deceived this community, convincing people she stood for justice, when in reality, she was running a drug operation under their noses. A murmur rippled through the crowd. In the gallery, a few people shook their heads in disappointment. Boone and O'Connell exchanged satisfied glances. Everything was going according to plan. But then, Elliot Chambers stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to challenge these allegations." Alden barely spared him a glance before giving a curt nod. Elliot strode to the center of the courtroom, turning to face the jury. "We are prosecuting a woman who has spent her life fighting for justice. And the only evidence we have, the word of a convicted drug dealer, someone already behind bars, someone with a rap sheet a mile long." He let his words sink in, then slowly turned his gaze toward Boone and O'Connell. "There is no surveillance footage showing Monica Caldwell handling these drugs. No fingerprints linking her to the seized packages. No physical evidence tying her to this crime." Boone's expression hardened. "And more importantly," Elliot continued, voice deliberate, "we demand an independent forensic analysis of the alleged narcotics." The air in the courtroom shifted. Tension snapped through the space like a live wire. Boone stiffened. O'Connell shot him a glance. "What the hell is he doing?" O'Connell muttered. Boone clenched his jaw, keeping his voice level. "Don't panic. Alden won't let this go anywhere." At the bench, Judge Alden cleared his throat and set down his gavel. "Mr. Chambers, what exactly are you suggesting?" Elliot met his gaze, unwavering. "I'm suggesting a second test. If the prosecution's evidence is solid, they shouldn't have any objections to independent verification." Alden's jaw tightened. Boone gripped the armrests of his chair. This wasn't part of the plan. A long, tense silence followed. Then, finally, slowly, Alden nodded. "Request granted. The evidence will be re-examined." Boone and O'Connell went completely still. For the first time since this started, the plan was slipping through their fingers. The courtroom was so silent. You could hear the faint tapping of a pen against the wooden desk. Ever since Judge Alden had granted the request for an independent forensic analysis, the entire atmosphere had shifted. The prosecutor frowned, casting a quick glance at Boone and O'Connell, as if searching for reassurance. Neither of them spoke, but Monica saw it, the unease in their eyes. They hadn't expected this case to take a turn. Elliot Chambers stood tall, adjusting his tie, his expression razor-sharp. "Your Honor, we requested an independent forensic analysis of the alleged narcotics seized from my client's store." He paused, his gaze flicking toward Boone and O'Connell before continuing. The initial examination was conducted by the police department's forensic team, a department where Lieutenant Garrett Boone and Sergeant Travis O'Connell hold significant influence. I believe it is only fair that we allow an independent team to verify the results. Judge Alden didn't respond immediately. His fingers drummed lightly against the stack of papers before him. He hadn't anticipated this, and that told Monica something important. He wasn't in complete control. Very well, Alden finally said, his voice measured. Let's hear the forensic report. A door at the back of the courtroom opened. A middle-aged man with graying hair stepped inside, wearing a crisp white lab coat and carrying a thick file. Dr. Daniel Mercer, head of the state's independent forensic division. He walked to the witness stand, adjusted his glasses, and opened his report. Your Honor, my name is Dr. Daniel Mercer. My team conducted an independent analysis of the evidence collected from Caldwell's market. We used the most advanced testing methods to ensure absolute accuracy. He turned a page, pausing briefly. The room held its breath. Boone's fists clenched. O'Connell gritted his teeth. Something was wrong. Then Mercer looked up, calm, steady, and dropped a bombshell. I can state with absolute certainty that the substance found in the plastic bag seized by the police is not a narcotic. 3 seconds of pure, stunned silence. Then the courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, shocked whispers. A few members of the jury turned to each other, wide-eyed. The prosecutor paled. Monica wasn't surprised. She was too busy watching Boone and O'Connell. And for the first time, they looked afraid. What the hell is going on? O'Connell hissed. We tested it ourselves. Boone didn't answer. He just sat there frozen, his eyes dark with rage. Dr. Mercer continued. Upon further analysis, we found that the white powder inside the evidence bags was nothing more than granulated sugar. A shockwave tore through the room. Monica turned slowly, her gaze locking onto Boone and O'Connell. For the first time, they weren't in control. Boone inhaled deeply, leaning back in his chair, fingers drumming against the armrest. O'Connell, on the other hand, was stiff, his eyes darting toward the prosecutor, desperate for a way out. The prosecutor shot to his feet, voice tight with frustration. Objection! There could have been an error in testing. We request additional time too. But Elliot cut him off. Your Honor, I don't believe we need additional time. If the alleged evidence does not exist, then these charges have no foundation. The prosecutor went silent. His eyes flicked to Alden, pleading for help. But Alden was sweating now, his jaw tense. This wasn't part of the deal. He had been paid to ensure Monica Caldwell never walked free. But now his hands were tied. Monica stayed quiet, but inside her, something was stirring. They had spent so much time building their trap, and now they were the ones caught inside it. Then, the courtroom doors swung open, and Desmond Tate walked in. The entire room fell silent. No one had expected the new chief of police of Ashton Heights to appear. Dressed in his crisp uniform, his badge gleaming, Desmond strode inside without saying a word. But his presence alone changed everything. Monica didn't react outwardly, but her eyes gleamed with something sharp and unshakable. Boone and O'Connell were frozen in place. Their eyes locked onto Desmond with something Monica had never seen in them before. Not arrogance, not confidence, not even anger. Fear, because they knew who he was. What they didn't know was Desmond Tate wasn't just the chief of police. He was Monica Caldwell's husband. The courtroom doors shut behind Desmond Tate. He didn't rush. He didn't make a spectacle of his entrance. But with just one step inside, everything changed. No one had expected the new chief of police of Ashton Heights to appear here, especially not in the middle of a trial that had just taken a turn no one saw coming. Every pair of eyes turned to him. Monica remained composed, her expression steady. But in her gaze, there was a flicker of something else. A spark, because only a select few in this room knew the truth. The man who had just walked in wasn't just the chief of police. He was her husband. Across the courtroom, Boone and O'Connell sat frozen. Their faces had lost all color, as if they had seen a ghost. Judge Richard Alden swallowed hard, his grip tightening on his gavel. None of them had anticipated this. and that terrified them. Desmond Tate moved toward the gallery with slow, deliberate steps. Not rushed, not hesitant. His presence alone was enough to shift the weight of the room. Even the officers seated behind Boone and O'Connell unconsciously straightened their backs because they had just realized they were in the presence of a higher power. No one spoke. No one dared. Monica sat still, quietly observing Boone. She had seen him arrogant, cunning, so sure of his control over everything. But now he was motionless. And O'Connell? He turned to Boone, his whisper sharp with panic. The chief? What the hell is he doing here? He's got nothing to do with this case. Boone didn't answer. His jaw was clenched so tightly his muscles twitched from the strain. Because he knew everything had just changed. The silence stretched, suffocating, until Judge Alden finally cleared his throat, struggling to regain control. He slammed his gavel down. Order in the courtroom. Desmond Tate finally stopped walking. His eyes met Alden's, calm yet carrying undeniable weight. Alden narrowed his gaze. He knew something was wrong. Chiefs of police didn't just appear at trials unannounced, especially not at the trial of their own wife. Boone saw it too. He leaned forward slightly, his voice a low growl as he murmured to O'Connell. If he knows we just framed his wife. O'Connell swallowed hard. Boone didn't need to finish the sentence, because they both understood. They hadn't just gone after Monica Caldwell. They had gone after the wife of the chief of police. And that was the deadliest mistake they had ever made. Desmond still hadn't spoken. He simply looked, first at Monica. She was still seated at the defendant's table, hands cuffed but not broken. She lifted her chin, her gaze unwavering, as if to say, I'm still here. I'm still standing. Then Desmond's gaze shifted to Boone. Not a single word passed between them. But in Desmond's eyes, there was a storm. Boone's throat went dry. For the first time in this entire trial, he felt real fear. Because Desmond Tate wasn't a man who could be bought. He wasn't a man who could be threatened. He wasn't a man who could be controlled. And that meant they had miscalculated. Judge Alden cleared his throat again, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Chief Tate, what an unexpected surprise. However, I'm afraid your presence is irrelevant to these proceedings. We are in the middle of a serious trial. Finally, Desmond Tate spoke. His voice was deep, measured, but sharp as a blade. I know, just 2 words. And once again, the room fell into silence. Boone clenched his fists, forcing himself to breathe evenly. Monica watched her husband, an odd sense of calm settling over her. Because she knew Desmond too well. He hadn't come just to watch. He was here for a reason. And if Boone still believed he was in control, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. The air in the courtroom was thick, suffocating. The presence of Chief Desmond Tate hadn't just silenced the room. It had shifted the entire balance of power. Boone sat perfectly still. O'Connell swallowed hard, his eyes glued to the wooden table in front of him. Judge Richard Alden gripped his gavel, so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had presided over countless high-stakes trials, but never had he felt this kind of unease. Desmond hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't threatened anyone, but he didn't need to. His presence alone commanded the room, and he was looking at no one else. Only Monica, under the bright courtroom lights. Their eyes met in a silent exchange. Monica wasn't afraid. She sat tall, unwavering. But Desmond saw it, the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting too long, and it infuriated him. Alden cleared his throat, desperately trying to regain control. Chief Tate, I don't see how your presence here is relevant. This is a criminal trial, and Desmond lifted his gaze, sharp as a blade. I know exactly what this trial is. The courtroom froze. Boone and O'Connell tensed at the same time. Alden opened his mouth to argue, but Desmond's stare stopped him cold. Elliot Chambers seized the moment. Your Honor, I think it would be wise to let the chief continue. Alden hesitated. He had no choice. With clear reluctance, he gave a stiff nod. Very well. What do you have to say, Chief Tate? Desmond stepped forward, slow, deliberate, but he didn't take the witness stand. He simply stood, watching the jury, watching the prosecutor, watching every uniformed officer in the room. Then, finally, watching Boone and O'Connell. The two corrupt officers sat rigid, locked in his sights like prey. Then Desmond spoke. "I have served as the chief of police of this city for several months now." His voice was calm, measured. "I have spent that time learning, watching, understanding how this system truly works." He took another step forward, and what I found was unacceptable. A ripple of unease spread through the gallery. Boone's forehead was slick with sweat. "For years," Desmond continued, "this police force has been controlled by a select few. People who do not uphold the law. They manipulate it. They don't protect this city. They control it." The courtroom stirred. Whispers broke out. Some jurors turned to each other, their faces shifting with realization. Monica remained still, but deep inside, hope flickered to life. Because Desmond wasn't speaking without proof. If he had come here today, it meant he was holding something. Something powerful. Boone's breath quickened. He turned to O'Connell, whispering furiously. "He knows something. He wouldn't be here otherwise." O'Connell wiped a shaking hand across his brow. "But what can he do? This is a courtroom, not a—" He stopped mid-sentence, because Desmond Tate had just spoken the words that sent an earthquake through the room. 3 months ago, I launched an internal investigation into the Ashton Heights Police Department. Dead silence. Monica inhaled deeply. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. Boone blinked rapidly. O'Connell shook his head, trying to steady himself. "He's bluffing," he muttered. "No one can investigate us without us knowing." But when they turned back to Desmond, they realized they were wrong. Desmond's gaze locked onto Boone, unflinching. "Would you like me to list what I've found, Lieutenant Boone?" Boone clenched his fists, struggling to maintain his composure. He had lost control of the situation, and nothing terrified him more. Desmond exhaled slowly, his presence filling the room. "I am not here to intimidate anyone. I am not here to interfere with these proceedings. But I am here to ensure that the truth is not buried." Alden blinked rapidly, his forehead damp with sweat. Boone felt like he was sitting in fire. And Monica, she tightened her fists, because for the first time, Boone was afraid. And that meant one thing. His empire was starting to crumble. The courtroom was deathly silent. After Desmond Tate announced his internal investigation, no one spoke. No one dared. Boone sat rigid, his hands gripping the armrests like a lifeline. O'Connell stared blankly at the wooden table, his palms slick with sweat. Judge Richard Alden was frozen, his jaw twitching as if he had just heard his own death sentence. And Monica? She didn't speak, but she knew. Their empire was beginning to crumble. Desmond stepped forward, placing a thick file onto the witness stand. "For the past 3 months, I've been investigating this department, and what I've uncovered." He flipped open the first page, his voice slow, deliberate, razor-sharp. "Was worse than I ever imagined." Behind him, the massive courtroom screen flickered to life. Confidential files, internal reports, evidence of corruption, tampered cases, fabricated arrests. And whose names were all over them? Garrett Boone, Travis O'Connell, Richard Alden. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, shocked murmurs. The jury members leaned forward, stunned. The prosecutor turned pale. Elliot Chambers stood, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Your Honor, these documents prove that Lieutenant Boone and Sergeant O'Connell have abused their power to manipulate the law, framing innocent people, including Monica Caldwell. And not just her. This has been happening for years." Monica turned to Boone. For the first time, he couldn't meet her eyes. And then Marissa Alden stood up. Every head in the room snapped toward her. The wife of Judge Richard Alden. She had sat in silence through the entire trial. But now, she couldn't stay silent any longer. Her hands clenched into fists as she faced her husband. "Richard," her voice trembled, but it was steady. "I've had my suspicions for years. But now I know the truth." Alden's eyes widened. "Marissa, don't." But she cut him off. "How much did they pay you?" Her voice cracked. "How many cases did you rig? How many lives did you destroy for dirty money?" The courtroom exploded once more. The jury whispered amongst themselves. Some of the spectators shook their heads in disgust. The prosecutor turned toward Alden, his expression shifting from concern to outright doubt. Alden's mouth opened, but no words came out, because control had slipped through his fingers. Boone stirred uneasily. He could see where this was going. He turned to O'Connell, his voice low and urgent. "We need to get ahead of this now." O'Connell swallowed hard, his face ashen. "How?" "He has proof. Alden just lost control. We can't." The courtroom doors swung open. A team of FBI agents walked in. Silence. Suits. Badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Unshakable authority. They marched toward Boone, O'Connell, and Alden. The lead agent pulled out a warrant. "Lieutenant Garrett Boone, Sergeant Travis O'Connell, Judge Richard Alden. You are under arrest for corruption, abuse of power, evidence tampering, and multiple other charges." Boone shot to his feet. "Wait! You can't!" Click. Cold steel snapped around his wrists. Boone went completely still. O'Connell didn't fight. He couldn't even speak as his hands were yanked behind his back. Alden collapsed into his seat, his head hanging low. It was over. The entire courtroom held its breath. The men who once ruled Ashton Heights were now bound in chains. Monica watched. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. Because this wasn't a victory. This was just the beginning of justice. Boone was being dragged down the center aisle when he stopped. He turned to Monica. His face was twisted in rage, in bitterness. But there was something else. Fear. He clenched his jaw, his voice a low snarl. "You might have won today, but the system, it will never change." Monica stared back at him. Then she whispered, "It's not the system that will change. It's the people who run it." Boone was pulled away. The doors slammed shut behind him. And at that moment, Ashton Heights stepped into a new era. News of Boone, O'Connell, and Alden's arrest spread through Ashton Heights like wildfire. That night, every major news channel flashed the same breaking headlines. Television, Lieutenant Garrett Boone, the law's biggest fraud, arrested. Television, Judge Richard Alden exposed as a corrupt pawn, taken into custody. Television, Ashton Heights Police Department faces its biggest reckoning in history. The people poured into the streets, not to protest in fear, but to celebrate. Those who had once been silenced by Boone and O'Connell's brutality now stood outside the police precinct, holding their signs high. No more dirty cops. Justice has prevailed. By morning, the purge had begun. At dawn, Desmond Tate ordered a full-scale investigation into the police department. Collision 30 officers were suspended on the spot. Collision 12 were charged for their ties to Boone and O'Connell's illegal operations. Some officers ripped off their badges and resigned immediately, knowing their time of unchecked power was over. The police were no longer the enforcers of corruption. Now, they were the ones under investigation. And in the midst of it all, Monica Caldwell was finally free. She stepped out of her cell not as a victim, but as a warrior returning from battle. Outside, Elliot Chambers and Desmond Tate were waiting for her. Elliot offered a small, knowing smile. "You don't have to thank me. I was just doing my job." Monica met his gaze, her voice quiet but firm. "No, you did more than that. You fought for justice. Even when it wasn't easy." Elliot chuckled. "Then I guess we'll be fighting for a long time, because this journey, it's only just beginning." Desmond stepped forward, his eyes filled with something deeper than pride. Not because Monica was his wife, but because she had stood her ground, because she had refused to break. Monica tilted her head back, looking up at the sky over Ashton Heights. She knew the truth. Justice was never a single battle. It was a war without end. But this time, she wouldn't be fighting it alone. 3 days after Garrett Boone, Travis O'Connell, and Richard Alden were arrested in open court, Ashton Heights was still reeling. News stations ran the footage on repeat, the once untouchable figures in handcuffs being dragged away. The city was still trying to make sense of it all. At street corners, cafes, and bus stops, people whispered, "I never thought this day would come. They ruled this city for too long. But who's going to replace them? Will things really change? Or is this just another show?" Monica Caldwell knew the truth. Justice wasn't just about taking down the corrupt. If she and Desmond didn't take the next step, the system would rot all over again. The reckoning. At dawn, inside the Ashton Heights Police Department, Desmond Tate stood before his remaining officers. No Boone, no O'Connell, but the tension was still there. He scanned the room. Some faces held uncertainty. Some held anger. Some relief. Some had flourished under the old system. Others had waited too long for change. Desmond exhaled, then spoke. Today we start over. All eyes locked on him. I don't care who you worked under before, but from this moment forward, there will be no place for corruption, no place for abuse, and no place for fear in this department. He placed a thick file onto the table. 30 officers have been suspended pending investigation. 12 have already been charged for their ties to Boone and O'Connell. And if any of you feel you can't serve under a system of integrity, you can hand in your resignation today. Silence. No one stood, but Desmond saw it. The flickers of doubt, the silent resistance in some of their eyes. He knew. Not everyone in this room wanted change, but he didn't care. This time, justice would not be compromised. While some celebrated the purge, others wanted the old order back. Politicians who had once protected Boone felt the walls closing in. Businessmen who had used the police as their private enforcers felt exposed. The city's underground power players weren't about to stay quiet. One evening, on a local news broadcast, a reporter interviewed Senator Douglas Reed, a known ally of the old system. Senator Reed, what are your thoughts on Chief Tate's reform efforts? Reed took a slow sip of water before responding, measured but pointed. I think he's moving too fast. This system has been in place for years. Suddenly purging dozens of officers could lead to instability. Can we truly trust that he has no political motives of his own? Immediately, the media exploded. Is Desmond Tate cleaning house or consolidating power? With so many officers gone, is the city still safe? Can we trust a new system, or will it fail just like the last one? Those who had once profited from the corruption were now sowing doubt. And Desmond realized something. He couldn't do this alone. The offer. That night, at their home, Desmond sat across from Monica. A file sat between them. He slid it toward her. I want you to look at this. Monica picked it up, flipping through the pages. It was a formal contract, an official appointment as special advisor to the Ashton Heights Police Department. She looked up, eyes searching his. You want me to oversee the reform? Desmond nodded. No one understands the system like you do. You've fought against it. You've seen its darkest corners. And you're the only person I trust to make sure it never falls back into the wrong hands. Monica didn't answer right away. She knew what this meant. If she stepped into this fight, she would never walk away from it. She had been battling for so long. Did she want to keep going? Desmond's gaze was steady. If you don't take this role, the system will still change. But it will be missing someone who can see what others refuse to see. Are you willing to let that happen? Monica closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. She already knew the answer. Because if she didn't do it, what? She opened her eyes, meeting his with unwavering resolve. I'll do it. The next morning, Monica Caldwell walked through the front doors of the Ashton Heights Police Department. This building had once been Boone and O'Connell's domain, a place where oppression was planned behind closed doors, where justice had been twisted to serve power. But not today. Today, Monica wasn't walking in as a victim. She was walking in as someone with the power to change it all. As she moved down the hallway, officers whispered. Some nodded respectfully. Others watched her with quiet skepticism. She could feel the resistance. Change was never easy, but Monica hadn't come here to be liked. She had come to make sure justice was done. The office had once belonged to Garrett Boone. The same massive desk, the same window overlooking the city. But the old power was gone. Now, sitting in the center of the desk was a new nameplate, gleaming under the morning light. No room for corruption in Ashton Heights. She ran her fingers over the smooth surface, feeling the weight of what was to come. This place had been the heart of corruption. Now, it would be the foundation of justice. She barely had time to sit down before a file was placed in front of her. 2 suspended officers were rallying colleagues against the reform. Political figures were stalling policy changes. Business elites, who had once profited from police protection, were pushing back. The old system wasn't dead yet. Monica glanced up to see Desmond Tate standing across from her, arms crossed. They won't go down without a fight, he said. Monica exhaled, a slow, knowing smile crossing her lips. Then neither will we. That night, Monica attended her first community meeting as special advisor. The room was packed. People weren't just here to listen. They had questions. They had doubts. They had fears. A middle-aged man stood up, skepticism thick in his voice. I've heard a lot of promises before. Nothing ever changes. Why should we believe you? The room fell silent. All eyes on Monica. She didn't flinch. She picked up the microphone and met their gazes head on. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to look at what we've already done. Boone, O'Connell, Alden, they were untouchable. But where are they now? No one answered. Monica's voice was steady, unwavering. I can't fix the city alone, but I can promise you this. No one in this community will ever have to walk their own streets in fear again. And if anyone still wants to stand in the way of change, I will stand in front of them. A long pause. Then one pair of hands clapped. Then another. And suddenly, thunderous applause filled the room. That night, Monica stood by her office window, looking out at the city. Ashton Heights wasn't fixed. The underground power players were still lurking. More battles were coming. There were still those who wanted to drag the city back into the shadows. But Monica wasn't fighting alone anymore. She had Desmond Tate. She had Elliot Chambers. She had a city that was finally ready to fight for itself. And this time, she wouldn't let justice be stolen again. She wouldn't let this city fall back into darkness. Monica turned away from the window. Then, with steady steps, she walked out of the office. Because a new chapter for Ashton Heights had just begun. The story of Monica Caldwell is more than just a personal battle. It is a mirror reflecting modern society, where justice is too often twisted by power and corruption. It serves as a reminder that change does not happen on its own. It requires those who are willing to stand up, despite the risks, despite the cost. In today's world, anyone can be a Monica, someone who dares to ask questions, who demands fairness, who refuses to accept injustice. Do not stay silent. Do not turn away. The truth can be buried for a time, but it will always rise, so long as there are people willing to fight for it. The downfall of a corrupt system is just the beginning, but can justice truly win in the long run? Comment your thoughts and subscribe for more gripping stories, where truth and conspiracy always collide.